Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, the my Pedic base, Halacha Aleph, Daf Yud Zayin. We left off on Daf Yud Zayin, Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top of the Amud. Rabbi Yossi Kfar Dan, B'Shem Rabbi Madanya, will give a teaching, and that is that as we began learning regarding Kesarin, that since it was not resettled by the Oil Bubble, it has the status of Chutz La'aretz. We began yesterday learning about Beit Sha'an, and ultimately Rabbi's Psak, that Beit Sha'an is also not part of Eretz Yisrael, which means that produce that grows there are exempt from Maasros and from the restrictions of the Shemitah year. But as we learned all the way in the beginning of this Pedic, holding all of that being true, produce imported from Eretz Yisrael into Beit Sha'an will be bound at least by Demai, right? When you buy it from an Am Ha'aretz, as long as we know that it didn't come directly from a Goy, then it would be Tevel Vadai. And we're going to get into certain specific products that are Piroiv imported from Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, even though you're buying them in Beit Sha'an, even according to Rabbi, they will be subject to the dinim of Maasros and to Shemitah. We're going to continue to learn how Roiv plays the determining factor. We follow Roiv, right, called the Parish Meruba Parish. We're going to learn more about some rules regarding Sfichim that we mentioned in the last year, meaning that even though Midai Daisa, a product, whether it is grain or legumes or vegetables or fruit, if they grow on their own on the Shemitah year, Sfichim, of course, they are bound with the restrictions of Shemitah. There is a Kedusha. You can't do business with the product. It has to be destroyed when it comes to the Zman Habir. But they may be eaten midrabanan, other than fruit, which remain permitted to be eaten. When it comes to grains, when it comes to vegetables, let me just add, when it comes to legumes, these are all products that you plant them once, for them to grow once, midrabanan. If they fully grow on the 7th year, they are also. And what we're going to add, we're going to learn today in an added detail to the Rabbanan, to this rabbinic decree on Sfichim, that even if they are being sold in the marketplace on the 8th year, since they grew on the 7th year, they also will remain prohibited. As we had before by Kesarin, the Gemara in today's Daf Yud Zayin is going to speak about the boundaries of Beit Sha'an. And finally, we're going to learn about the third locality in Eretz Yisrael. And here we will be going to the north, an area that the Gemara here calls Panyas, with a P, with a P. Many understand that to be Banyas, right? That's located near Har Cheman, near the base of the Jordan River, that also does not have a din of Eretz Yisrael proper, because it was not settled by the Oile Bubble. Now, what we're going to have at the end of today's daf, which will really be another new prat that will be fascinating, and that is like this. I know we keep on mentioning that even the lands that were conquered, kibush, by Oile Mitzrayim, if they were not settled by the Oile Bubble, they don't have a din of Eretz Yisrael. However, as we'll begin to learn right now, we'll learn a lot about this in the Masechta Shvis, that produce that's grown there is not bound by Zman Biur, because it's not imbued with Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. However, since it was conquered by the Oile Mitzrayim, therefore the land there may not be worked. In other words, there was some restriction of Shemitah, even though, as far as our sugya is concerned, we keep on repeating, whether it is Kesaran, whether it's going to be Beit Shan, whether it's going to be Panyas, it wasn't resettled, it's not holy. And now, on top of that, we're going to have another layer. And that is that how are we to view cities that are non-Jewish cities, but that they pay taxes to the Jewish government, to the government in Eretz Yisrael? Are they considered at least like cities that were conquered by Oile Mitzrayim and not by Oile Bubble? Then again, this specific din that the land may not be worked upon on Shemitah. In other words, since they pay tax, is it somehow connected to Eretz Yisrael? And for that, we're going to have a machlokes today between Rav Imi and Rabbi. Good. That's more or less a sikkim of today's daf. Let's go to Daf Yud Zayin. Daf Yud Zayin, Amud Aleph, 7 by the end of the line. Rabbi Yosi the Kfardan, in the name of Rabbi Ma'adia, is saying, including accepting the lenient new understanding of Rabbi, which is that Beit Sha'an is not considered Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, like we mentioned up until now, if you have a product in the marketplace that at least Al Piroiv did not grow locally, but it came from within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, so then it's bound by the restrictions of Demai and by Shemitah, etc. So Haminam Ha'asunim Beit Sha'an, the following items are going to be Asur, even if you buy them in Beit Sha'an, even according to Rabbi, because they were imported from Eretz Yisrael, or at least Roiv of these items in the marketplace of Beit Sha'an, they were imported. And what are they? Ketzach, fennel. We can have given with pictures, shum sesame seeds, chardal mustard seeds, shum garlic. And here we have habul, choisin. We already had this in the previous daf. Let's go with the girsa that we learned, habul boisin, and that's a superior type of fig. Apunim, ashchoinim, hanem karamamida, black afunim, but only the ones that are sold in bulk. Afunim, according to many, are chickpeas, and if they are sold in bulk, that's an indication that they are imported, and imported meant in Beit Sha'an from Eretz Yisrael, ubitzalim, and similarly onions. That what b'nei hamedina namakaram b'midam, the ones that are again sold in bulk, pulamitzri hanegad bisipa, an Egyptian bean, but only the ones that were bundled with reed grass. The ones that were not bundled with reed grass, they did grow locally. Ominta, that's mint. Hanegedus bifnei yatzma, that's bundled by itself. In other words, the local grown mint were not sold in the marketplace by themselves. They were bundled with other greens. If they are bundled by themselves, that's more chashuv. And that's also because they were imported. And veho is taf nine, a certain type of plant, perhaps a certain type of wild carrot. On these, this is all Rabbi Yosi, the Kfardan, saying, La'olam, they are prohibited. La'olam means not only are they prohibited, but they are prohibited no matter what time of the year you purchase them in. And now, the final item, before the Gemara is going to interrupt his continued statement, the kaf loitois are leeks. Here, it depends when you buy them. And that is only minuatzeres v'ada Chanukah, the ones that you buy in the marketplace between Shavuos and Chanukah, those are presumed al piroiv to have been imported, meaning from Eretz Yisrael. Yes, being sold and bought in Beit Sha'an, but they are products of the Holy Land. And the kafloitos, however, that are being sold from Chanukah until Atzeres, they are exempt completely from ISIS, whether they come locally, whether maybe they came beyond that it's Yisrael, but they're mutter. Now, before we go on, the Gemara now says, Amar Rabbi Ze'eram, min ho'atzeres v'ada Chanukah, iser rava min ho'eter. No, it's when Rabbi Yosi the Kfartan is saying that between Shavuos and Chanukah, let's say these leeks are prohibited. It's not because there were no local leeks that are really permitted being sold, but it's because as we keep on learning, we follow the rule of Roiv, called the Parish. You're buying something not where they grew, you're buying it in the market. It came from Roiv. So therefore, Rava al ha'isur, it's all about now. Another detail, and now again, like we mentioned in our words of introduction, we're going to go concerning the rabbinic prohibition of sfichem. That means that legumes, we're adding that, we didn't mention that in the last stuff, and grains and vegetables, midrabanan, the ones that grew in the Holy Land may not be consumed, period. And not only may they not be consumed if they were purchased or if they were taken or if they were gifted, they were received on the 7th year, but that goes even if they're being in the marketplace after the Shemitah year, on the 8th year. So says the Gemara that Svichen Rosh Hashanah Ba'at Chanukah, you have the Isur Svichen. Makes a lot of sense, right? Because the roiv that are growing, that are being sold in the marketplace, when were they harvested? It's only Chanukah. It was harvested in the 7th year. When a Chanukah Valat Seres, from Chanukah until Shavuos, Heter Svichim, because we presume they grew and they were harvested on the 8th year. Umin Hatzeres Vad Rosh Hashanah, from Hatzeres until Rosh Hashanah, Tzricha, we already had this word many times in the Yerushalmi. Tzricha means we don't know. We have to look into it. Well, guys, obviously this is very problematic because I get it. From Rosh Hashanah until Chanukah, you are the closest to the previous 7th year. You got to Isur Svicha. If you're saying that already from Chanukah until Shavuos, Heter, because it came from the 8th year, then after the Atzeres, you are even further from the 7th year. It doesn't make sense. And because of that, or together with that, if you go to the bottom, to the Biur Hagra, on the right side, 6 lines from the top, 3 lines from the bottom, he has another version, which Pashut fix. It's an easy way out. Min Svichen, from Rosh Hashanah until Chanukah, Asur Svichen, Pedish, Shevadai, Mishviyasei. Min Ashvi is Vadrosh, Min Atzeres, Vadrosh Hashanah. Here is the change of the version. From after Shavuos until the 9th year, Rosh Hashanah, Vadai Het Svichen. Pedish, Shekvar, Yesh Gamkein, Mo'is Hashanah. And when we say Shekvar Yesh Gamkein, that means Roiv. Roiv that's being sold is coming from the local, from the current year, the 8th year. However, the tzricha, the question, that's a way of changing, amending the girsa, and it fits. Now, don't forget, we interrupted the words of Rabbi Yossi, the Mindan, bin Kfardan. Let's continue. Hakishuyin, let's go with squash. Sometimes it's cucumbers. Hadiluyin, v'havatichin, v'hamalafa fanois, v'hayayim, v'hashemen, and utmarim ifsiyois, a certain type of date, ifsi dates. V'yesh oimrim, even turmoisin. Turmoisin is that unique type of bean. We learn about it a lot in Chassidus. Rabbi Akiva used it in his debate with Turnus Rufus. It's a bean that you have to cook it. I think you strongly cook it for 7 times until it becomes edible. Ufas chala, which is a certain type of legume. La'olam, here again, no matter what time of the year, even though you're buying them in Beit Sha'an, and even though we are accepting Shitas Rabbeinu HaKadosh, that Beit Sha'an is not imbued with Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, but these are items that were Al Pi Roiv in their majority imported from Eretz Yisrael. Givaldik. Okay. Furthermore, and now, everything that we mentioned above, Harei Elu Shvi'is, which means that you cannot do Schoira with them on the Shemitah year, which means that these items from the 7th year, right, that they are bound to Biur Shemitah, the kitzur, that these items, we divide Eretz Yisrael into 3 Medinos, into 3 regions, 3 like states in the country, in today's verbiage, and in each one of them, we look whether this item is still available, hefket in the field, so to say, for the animals. When it is available still in the field to be found, then whatever you took in limited amounts from hefket, you may consume in your home. The moment it's no longer available in the fields, you have to get rid of it. That's called the Zman Abir. These are all dinim connected to the din of Shemitah. Okay. Now, Bishar Shnei Shavua Ma. So all of these items, we're saying that since they are imported, they are treated like Shemitah. Okay. Now, what about during the remaining of the 6 years? They are imported from Eretz Yisrael to Beit Sha'an. Here we have a machlokes. Gavaldik, Rabbi Yoina says the Mai, which actually fits with what we're learning about on this payday. Again, you're buying it l'chayda from a yid. So, okay, it's coming from Eretz Yisrael. Don't forget the yid, the seller, is saying, I tithed it. Elama, from the times of Yechanan Kohen Gadol, he lost some of his nemanus. The Mai. Now Rabbi Yossi says, wow, tevel. And why is that? Because we're saying it came from a goy. So we had this before. Or we also, the guys, let's not forget that we learned, right, just about the kutim, that even though they were observant, even when they were observant for themselves at that time, the negeya kashrus machalos asuros, which includes tithing produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael properly, but since they misinterpreted lifnei iver l'sit and michshol to mean literally, and not to mean what Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that it means, which means that they had no problem causing someone to stumble in their observance of Yiddishkeit. They're not trustworthy. They were never trustworthy to sell if it's meat. Who says they shechted it? For themselves, they would, not to sell it. Who says produce was tithed? We don't say that they tithed it at all. And that's what the Gemara is going to explain, that Rabbi Yoina and Rabbi Yossi are not arguing, that what? The Rabbi Yoina, who says that these products bought in Beit Sha'an with the presumption al piroiv that it came imported from Eretz Yisrael is belekeach minha belunke. Belunke is a middleman. The middleman is Jewish, and therefore we have to say the middleman, even if he bought it from a goy. Again, we are following the sheet of Rabbi Meir, that even though if the goy was a farmer, generally his ownership does not remove it from its inherent obligation of it being tithe. Elamah, the goy won't do it. So the Jewish middleman who buys it from a goyish farmer will tithe it. Problem is that the middleman is an amaretz. Okay, but it's the might. And Omar the Rabbi Yossi Omar Vadai is v'lekeach min agina. When you buy it from a farmer, it's amazing. You don't know the status of the farmer. The farmers that sold these products to be sold in Beit Sha'an, they were at least half of them were kutim or roiv kutim. And here again, since they were kutim, even when they were considered Jews, they were like Sadukim, meaning that they misinterpreted Torah Shebechsav without using our Mesaida, and they would sell to us Tevel Vadai, Atkan, the exceptions that we are learning today, even though we concur with Rabbi, even though Beit Sha'an is not considered Eretz Yisrael, but those specific items, they were imported. It's amazing how Talmud Yerushalmi, it's so close. It's like we're living with already a few days with Eretz Yisrael in a new type of context. Because we're not learning a new din. We are learning many, many new dinim, but the main focus is special, like it's down to earth, different cities, what was sold there, what was not sold there, where did it come from? Now, at Heichon, we had the same question when it comes to the boundaries of Kesarim. Here we are having a pocket of land in Eretz Yisrael that halachically was then not considered Eretz Yisrael. So what are the boundaries? So the Gemara says it's Parashta, Uretzifta, V'nafsha Dipa Nutia, At Kfar Karnaim, including Kfar Karnaim, the Beit Sha'an. Let me tell you what's interesting. Before, when we had Kesarim, at least one part of Kesarim was on the Mediterranean, right? So there we simply, and the Gemara, so we had the western boundary. The eastern boundary of Kesarim, the Gemara said in the beginning, any area from where you can see the sea, that is part of Kesarim. So the only boundary we needed to give was the northern and the southern boundary. Beit Sha'an is different. Beit Sha'an is pushing inside the land. So you have to give all of the surrounding boundaries of Beit Sha'an, and that's what the Gemara just did right now. Okay. And now we're going to move on to the third area in Eretz Yisrael. But now we are moving to further north, to the territory of Dan. And the Gemara is going to refer to a location here in the Yerushalmi called as Panyas with a P, with a P. And many suggest that this is more or less where Banyas is located nowadays. Many of us went over there. It's a beautiful location, but it's at the edge of Har Chermoin. It's more or less the origin source, or the beginning of, not the origin. The origin of the Jordan River, I think, comes from the Nar Paras, but it's from the beginning of the Jordan River. Rabbi Yoina, B'Shem, Rabbi Shimon ben Zechariah says, again, based on the premise, given already, that Panyas was not settled by Oilabab. That which grows in Panyas is not bound, not by the restrictions of Maisvus, nor generally by the restrictions of Shemitah. But here again, like we had today regarding Beit Sha'an, so what? Many items that were sold in Panyas, they were imported from Eretz Yisrael. So Haminim Ho'asurim B'Panyas, the following Even though you bought them in panyas, they remain prohibited. Prohibited as, again, depends. If you got it from a yid, damai. If somehow it was purchased directly from a goy or goyish a farmer, goyish a middleman, and now sold in the market, tevel vadai. Egoism, walnuts, ha'oidis, and rice. And we didn't have in our Mishnah. If you remember rice, how the white rice that was sold then, even if it was sold in the country surrounding Eretz Yisrael, it certainly came from Eretz Yisrael that produced a superior type of rice. Here again, oiris, shumshumim, sesame seeds, poila mitzli, and this unique of Egyptian beef. Gamliel, zuga omar, another item, even though you bought it in panyas, achini yois habakurois, early ripening days. In other words, all of the items mentioned over here are not grown locally, or at least the majority of that which you buy in the marketplace is not grown locally, but yes, they are imported. Now, says the Gemara, that Amar Rabbi Yoina, that guy returned Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Hadad the Tamar, what we are talking about, what area of Panyas, what are the boundaries of Panyas? Mitarnagol Kesariyoin, Ulamaila, only from this area called Targol Kesariyan. This Kesariyan, my friends, is not the Kesariyan that we just learned 2 days ago, right? This is that was Kesarim on the Mediterranean. This is another city, all Roman cities. Kesariyan Ulamaila. The moment you go lower south from this boundary, from this locality, then Eretz Yisrael, then it's Eretz Yisrael, and none of the above are relevant. Even whether it was imported, whether it's grown locally, in both cases, it's going to be chayiv in maisris and in shvita. Okay. Now we're going to have a next couple of lines in the Gemara. There was a certain statement that we said correct based on the maskana of the next few lines. There is right now in the Gemara originally a havamina, a certain premise that the items that we mentioned, items that were al piroiv imported in these locations, even though they on their own have a din of chutz la'aretz, once the Chazal said that those items that you buy there are bound by maisres, the Gemara has now as a havamina. Even if you know that they grew locally, they will also be chayv in maisres, like a loy plug. That's the havamina of the Gemara, to which the Gemara is going to come to the maskana. No, that though these items, even though the quality of the land is like Eretz Yisrael, because God gifted it to the Jewish people, it's really within the biblical boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. It's not imbued with Kedushas Eretz Yisrael because the oil bubble didn't settle there. But the land still gave forth the same quality product. The maskana of this Gemara will be, is as we are saying, doesn't matter. If it grew locally, since at that time, up until now, it doesn't have Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, it will be exempt from ISIS. But that's not the premise of the Gemara. Again, the premise of the Gemara is that once we have in our Chazal these specific items that were generally imported from Eretz Yisrael, we will say that even if they grew locally, and you know they grew locally, they still remain midrabanan, bound by the laws of Maisus. So Rabbi Yoina boyim, what were to happen? That you had a vegetable garden, and we're speaking about you live in any of these 3 cities that we mentioned, in Kesaden and Bechan and Panyas, and together with the vegetables, you also planted rice. Uba umatzah oiris, one of the items mentioned that rice sold in Panyas has to be tied. Are you telling me that even though they grew together, yarak muter v'ha'oiris asur? And the irony of this, one of the ways of learning the next line in the Gemara, is that it's possible to plant rice inside a vegetable patch. By the way, there's no issue with kalayim regarding that. Rice grows tall, so you can have a patch of land, that which is growing closer to the earth, if we're going to go with this premise, will be mutter because it's growing in Panyas, because it's growing in Beit Sha'an. And the rice that's a bit taller from it will be chayiv in maisres, because the rice in that locality was al piroiv imported. Is it possible that oides, which is lamailon, and the yarak milmaton, in other words, they are all together? It's just which one is higher and which one is lower. Are we saying that yarak mutar v'oides asur? Says the Gemara, no, you misunderstood that. We're not saying that these items, since they were by the majority imported from Eretz Yisrael, even if they grow locally, they remain asur, meaning bound by ma'aser. We're not saying that. Aval means the emes is roiv asaras halolu oisus haminam halolu. That's what we're trying to say. What do we mean by that? Look inside. Aval be'emes. Look inside the Pnei Moshe. We have 3 lines before the end of the narrow lines. Be'emes, Ava means be'emes. He himself said the be'emes hainu tama. The reason why we had all of these items that if you buy in the marketplace of panyas, they have to be tied. Because lands right around panyas produce those items, so they were more affordable to import it from Eretz Yisrael. The other items that we did not mention is because and therefore it could be they are imported. It could be, but al piroiv they won't be imported. And let's go on. Keep your finger in the Pnei Moshe, the second wide line under the Gemara, and let's go read it first in the Gemara. Vafilu tema roiv asadas halalu oisois roiv amina ma'elu roiv amina malolu enaboy melamina isur. Look inside the Pnei Moshe. The premise that you had was wrong. Vafilu tema ramahadar ashas deloy. Meaning, vafilu tema roiv asadas halalu ein oisois roiv aminim halalu. Kain tzarich leimer. Even if it's not because the sodas around it produced a lot of them. The lav mishum elu hanizrois besodus be'elu hamakaymes gaz. It's not about what grows around it, it grows what's imported. Elohayna tama. Mishum deroiv haminam alolu ein aboy melamina isu. In other words, the Gemara is giving you, we're so used to, just like we're jumping in over here, it's so grounded, this Gemara. What we're learning over the last few daf already, of course, we're learning many dinim, which are fascinating. We'll still have a new din, but like we mentioned in the intro about Shemitah, about Olam Mitzrayim, and about Kibush, and about paying taxes. We're going to have a lot of sub-related laws. But the main focus is Pashut technical focus. It's Gavaldik. They're telling you that in these cities, first of all, the boundaries were not settled by Oil Bubble. And then they're telling you how it worked, what was sold in the marketplace. In other words, the Metzias then was that the roiv of the items that were sold in the marketplaces, now we're talking about panyas, they were imported from Eretz Yisrael. The hoyel, the elu hamakoyim esimuchan hein, yeah, because don't forget, panyas is within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. That's the way it worked. They used to import it from the nearby localities, and they brought it to sell in the marketplaces in Banyas. And that's the key. But if you know it grew in Panyas, it remains exempt. Let's read it this way. Which is really how we have been explaining the Gemara all along. Okay. Now we're going all the way back to Halach Aleph, to the beginning of Perek Sheni. Mishnah pointed out that rice, and we're speaking about a good quality white rice, was known in that time to have been grown dafke in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, even though you buy it b'chutz la'aretz, b'chol nakaim, we learned that Rambam speaks about Surya. In other words, in the lands around Eretz Yisrael, you have to presume that it came from Eretz Yisrael, and therefore it has to be tied. You good? Guys, we are on Daf Yud Zayin with base. Mamash middle of the Amma by the 2 dots. Funny, we learned in the Brais. Ha'oides shebechoiles antoichia. Antioch is, guys, north of Eretz Yisrael, outside of Eretz Yisrael, somewhere in Syria. Antiochia. So rice shebechoiles Antiochia, even though it's this good quality rice, but Antiochia also produced that rice. When you buy it in Antiochia, roiv from the white rice sold there is an exception to the rule in the Mishnah. That rice was grown locally. If you buy it outside Antiochia, you have to presume that it came from the roiv. Roiv, the majority of this great rice came from Eretz Yisrael. But in Antiochia, you can presume it came locally, and therefore, mutar b'makayim, it's not bound by any of the laws of Maisis. The Rabbi Lazar, the Rebbe Yosi, he did not only in Antiochia, but he extended it at Kadun. Many people have a girsa ad Beirut. In other words, it goes from Syria. If you know the map, it goes towards the west. It goes towards Beirut. Okay. Now, from Antiochia to Beirut, Google it. I don't know how many kilometers, how many miles. Let's say it's 50 kilometers. So the Gemara wanted to clarify that this statement of Rabbi Lazar is only between Antiochia and Beirut, or is he saying, he's explaining the Braisa. The Braisa is saying that there is an exception, that Antiochia would grow this great rice. And therefore, if you buy it in Antiochia, you could say it came locally. When he added until Beirut, maybe what he meant was, when you take, let's say Antiochia is 50 kilometers. So take a 50-kilometer extension from all of the directions of Antiochia, which would make sense. And any white rice bought there is also going to be exempt. Because why would we presume it came from Eretz Yisrael? Maybe it came locally. And as long as you have the Roiv local, you go after the Roiv. Rabbi Yoina Boyi, that is it only between Antiochia and Beirut, or maybe Uchemidasa l'chol ruach. In other words, we simply gave a kilometer number. But what we are really meaning is that you have to take, your compass and you have to make a circle around Antiochia, and you have to say that anything that's bought not only in Antiochia, but surrounding how many kilometers, the same distance from Antiochia until Beirut, that is where you still can say that this special rice was grown in Antiochia, and therefore it is exempt. He leaves that open. Maybe it's only from, in other words, it's a very practical how things work. When you learn enough of this, you should understand the way of the world in the times of the Gemara. Okay. Says the Gemara Rabbi. Elu ayoros asurais betchum tzur. So what we had until now is that physical locations in Eretz Yisrael, since they were not resettled by Oil Bavel, they are almost regarding everything like Chutz La'aretz. Now we're going to go in the other direction. Guys, Tzoid is Takat Tzoid, all the way in the north. We're going into Lebanon. I want you to know that Tzoid is in the boundaries of biblical Eretz Yisrael, and the Oil Bavel did not even come near it. We just learned in the Mai, at Keziv. Keziv is a little bit north of Haifa. You go further than that, it's Chutz La'aretz. Yidden settled near Tzoid. So just like you have in Eretz Yisrael proper, we had Kesarim, we had Beit Shan, today we have Banyas. Outside Eretz Yisrael, when you go into Lebanon, when you go into the north, even though you're going far away from where the majority of the Oil Bavel Yidden settled, there will still be pockets over there where it has Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. Elu ayoros, you get it? That are asurais betchum tzoid. And the names of the cities, you have to know. Shetzet, Betzet, Pimetzuva, Chanusa Aliyasa, Chanusa Tachtia, higher, Chanusa the lower Chanisa, Ubibaram, Veroishmaya, Va'amain, Umaze, Gamaldik. In other words, the Amar Abimana, Hadod Da'at Amar, he's explaining that what you are saying regarding these specific cities, Barushaina, they were settled by Yidden originally. Aval Achshav, but now we're going to read the Rashirilio, what Achshav means. Yesh Ayarish Yechziku Behem Yisrael Shein Asura. Look inside the Rashirilio, in the left side, 4 lines from the top. Aval Achshav, Shechziku Ladur Yisrael Bikvaram Acherem. Yidden established themselves in other villages. Yesh Acherois Miplachzur. Umuvlois betchum Susia, Kivan da Achshav Echziku betchumeo Yisrael, Vehechmiron, Vahachamoren Midian Lamazonis Min Hayore Shekavshu. Then Asirei, the Osu Lemite Bekavusha is Nami Lemishrei. So what he's saying is the following: that those cities that we mentioned, that the earlier Tanoi mentioned, are cities that have a Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, which would mean that when you buy it in that city, they're bound. You buy it outside the city, then it will be mutter. So Rav Mana is adding, hold on, cities grow, villages grow. When there's a couple of Jewish villages here, the nature is, right, real estate gets too expensive, you buy the adjacent land. Yidden began to expand already in the times of Rav Mana. And the nature is that when a Jew will make a new village near Muncie, he'll buy his produce from Muncie. The middle people will export it there. So once these cities were ushered, when we have Elu Ayarais Asurais, Elu meaning these and not other ones, says Ravana, no, hold on. But now all of the villages around it also are going to be ushered. Because items that were grown there, that are being sold there, will also be exported to the local, to the near Jewish villages. How great is that? Okay, that's the way that Ashadilio understands the Gemara. And now we're going weiter in the Brais. Ho'ayarois, ho'asurois, betchum susia, also, like we had in Soid, this is way outside where the majority of the Yidden lived in Eretz Yisrael. So they would call it, I don't know if this is in Lebanon, I don't know if this is in Syria, but it was like outside. Also, originally within the real boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, some oile bubbles settled there, and therefore they imbued it with Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. And you have to know the names of the cities. Einosh, Ein Tera, Rimbeiden, Ioin, V'Ya'adut, Yiddishkeit, Ya'adut, I don't know, Uchvar, V'Charuv, V'Noiv, V'Chaspio, Ukvar Tzemach, and on that, one thing, Rabbi, Hitler Kvar Tzemach. He disagrees with that. Look inside the Rashi Ilio. The Rabbi Hitler Kvar Tzemach. Ke'ein Omar Marhu. Shera Sheloi Hoisa Parnosas Ruba Ma'ayorei Shekavshu Ela Mino Uba Desharia. In other words, Kvar Tzemach, like we learned before, we had Kvar Tzemach. He held was not conquered by Oilabab. It was not settled by Oilabab. But when people would live there, they would import it from the nearby Eretz Yisrael cities. And Rabbi saw, that they grew the city so much that they began to plant in their own city. They had gardens, had orchards, and what was sold there was grown locally. Okay. Now, Rav Imi Boyi V'loi Mimale Misenhein. Let's go about Kvar Tzemach. How can you, Rabbi, say that, like the Rashi Ilio explained, that the items that are sold in Kvar Tzemach, Rabbi says, are grown in Kvar Tzemach, and therefore what? Kvar Tzemach itself is not Eretz Yisrael. That's what we're saying, because it was not settled by Oil Bubble. Let's repeat what we said on our introduction. This will be the final fascinating thing that we're learning right now. So we went through Kibush Mitzrayim, and then Oil Bubble. We imbued the Kedusha first by Kibush Mitzrayim, and then that Kedusha was lost by Golus by Yisrishon, and then it was re-imbued when the Yidden settled B'Reshus of the Persian government. We call that in the time of Oil Bubble. And just to clarify, Ido asked the question, I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, what happens nowadays? It doesn't work nowadays. That Kedusha was imbued when we resettled the land during that time. How do we define Kibush Mitzrayim? So the Rambam already writes that when Yeshua came into the land, there were the 3 letters that he sent. One option that they were given is to remain there and to pay taxes to the Jewish people. And there was one group, not the 31 kings that stood up to fight against us. We're speaking about when we came into Eretz Yisrael under the leadership of Yeshua, but the Gevoinim, they submitted themselves to pay taxes. And the halacha is that even though we didn't actually wage battle with them, the fact that they became submissive to us by agreeing prior to us entering there to pay taxes, that land was imbued with the Kedusha original. Remember that. Number 2, when we keep on learning, and we're saying correct, that all of that Kedusha left, Kedusha Rishoina, Kitcha L'Shaita, V'loi Kitcha L'Asadami, aside of Yerushalmi, we're speaking about everything else. And it had to be re-imbued with Kedusha from Oil Bubble. There is one residual effect that the original Kedusha has. And that is that any land that is in the kibush of Mitzrayim may not be worked on the Shemitah year. Produce that grows there, if it was not re-imbued with Kedusha by Oil Bubble, is not bound by Zman Biur. We're going to learn these dinner many times over. Just to remember at least one thing generally, that there is one halacha of Eretz Yisrael that continued even though it was not resettled by Oil Bubble, which is that you're not allowed to work the land on Shemitah. Rebbe is saying that Kvar Tzemach was never settled by Oil Bubble. Okay, we're going to go with that. Problem is, now comes the final one. How do we view a city? Not by Oila Mitzrayim, but now, Oila Bavel, that agreed to pay taxes to a Jewish government. Machloikis, Rabbi, and Ravimi. Ravimi holds that any country that pays taxes to the government in Eretz Yisrael, we view them like the territories that were conquered by Oila Mitzrayim, that were not re-imbued with Kedusha by Oila Bavel, but Epis Kedusha they have. So how, when Rabbi says Hita Kfar Tzemach, Rabbi means it's completely Chutz La'aretz. Question is why? So Rav Imi is asking, are they not paying taxes? And therefore, in other words, what's Rav Imi's kashes? Gemara explains, so Rav Imi, that ma'alei misin, that people, the cities, that agree to pay taxes to the Jewish government should have the status kemi shen niskapshu, like the other cities that were conquered by Yeshua. And what's the din of the cities that were conquered by Yeshua? That the land itself, even though it was not resettled by Oila Bavel, may not be worked on the Shemitah. Rabbi holds that Kfar Tzemach is completely Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because he disagrees with Ravimi. Because Rabbi has another approach, and he holds that when Yeshua entered the land, before we entered Eretz Yisrael, you're right, the Givonim, and maybe there were other sub-nations, if they agreed to pay taxes, that's called your compromise. If two countries are waging battle, and country E tells country B, listen here, if you agree to be submissive to us, we're not going to destroy your city. If they agree, that's called kibush. Surrender. That they surrender. But that's only if it's prior to the threat of a battle. If for whatever reason at a later point, one city agrees, like the government in Eretz Yisrael was less corrupt, so the roads that they build are better, whatever the government is better. So a city says, I want to become connected to you and not to whoever else is. This does not imbue it with any kedusha. You understand? That is what Rebbe holds. So therefore, Rebbe made a correct statement that Kfar Tzemach is completely mutter. Ravimi held Kfar Tzemach has a din of all the other countries that were conquered by Oila Mitzrayim that